free up cash flow for your business, and with fixed monthly payments, your fleet costs will always be the same. Sounds good, right? It also has a low cost of entry, and if your driver needs assistance, they'll call us, not you. And this product's name? Leasing, from Volkswagen Financial Services. So whether your business requires 1 or 100 vehicles, our leasing product can benefit you. Before you update your 191 fleet, visit vwfs.ie/leasing or call into your local authorised Volkswagen, Audi, Seat, Skoda or Volkswagen commercial vehicle retailer today. Terms and conditions apply.
You ain't shit! I wish I was 50 years younger and I'd kick your ass.
Well, fans can be the harshest critics, you know.
And they often are.
A wife is often the harshest critic of her husband.
I thought I was invincible. That's what you're trained to believe as a sports person.
There was 4 million people in Ireland who knew much more about managing football teams than I did. When it comes to music, I can spoof with the best.
Your sporting career is the best time you'll have, and you know you have to hang on to it for as long as your life, because everything else is pretty crappy.
And this is not lies. Stephen Rothschild has never spoken to Jim McGuinness in his life.
You're very welcome along to our Saturday panel. We're building up to Ireland, Argentina, Ireland All Blacks, England All Blacks. There's a whole lot of rugby to look forward to this afternoon, and I'm joined in the studio by Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent, Andy Dunne and Johne Murphy. How are we all getting on?
Good.
Cheers. You're out coaching, Johnny. Were you in the wet and wind and misery that was Saturday morning in Dublin?
I know, local derby between Mary's and Townure. It was a classic 7-all classic this morning, so it was a good game though. Townure a good side, so not a bad result for us going forward.
So 6:30 this evening, Ireland, Argentina. Hopefully it'll have cleared up a little bit by the time kickoff comes round. 18 points is the spread in this game. Does that seem realistic to you, Johnny?
I don't think so. I think the one worry that I would have gone into is that kind of Argentina are probably battle hardened after the rugby championship, and I think that's something that might, you know, I don't think it's going to catch Ireland hot, but I don't think it's an 18-point spread. I don't think it's worth that. You know, they're performing at such a, that competition is played at such a high level week in, week out for them that, you know, they really are, as I said already, they're quite battle hardened, and I think it's going to be quite an attritional affair, and I just 18 points just seems a bit much for me.
They finished bottom of the rugby championship, but they did win 2 matches. They won away in Australia and they beat South Africa at home. Where do you see Argentina right now, Andy? Are they, as usual, a year out from the World Cup, lulling everybody into some sort of false sense of security?
Yeah, well, I very famously, I think before 2015 World Cup, they embarked on this new style of play where they got Graham Henry down from the All Blacks, and they talked about changing entirely the style of rugby they played and moving to an offload type of game, and they were very poor at it, and they lost 78-12 to South Africa in Durban about 18 months before the 2015 World Cup, and then managed to beat South Africa about 2 months before the World Cup. Now they've obviously developed again in those 4 years since, and they've honed that offload game again. And I suppose 4 years later, after giving us a fair beating in that World Cup, they look like they're in a kind of a much evolved position. They look to me like they're very comfortable trying to play that type of game now, whereas there was trial and error for many seasons. They're very comfortable trying to play passing out of the tackle, very, very dangerous to defend against as a result. So I think, I think the 18-point spread is very, very generous. I think Ireland will win the game, but possibly 8 to 10 points max.
So has there been a complete rethink of Argentinian rugby over the last 4 or 5 years? Because traditionally in my head I still just think of Argentina, they'll try and kill you in the scrum and the pack is massive, whereas you look at it, it feels as though that's gone.
Yeah, I mean, the very first rugby international I went to was 1989 in the South Terrace in Lansdowne Road, and Hugo Porta was playing for Argentina. He's a legendary out half, but really they had 8 forwards, a scrum half, and Hugo Porta, and that, everybody knew what was coming to play in Lansdowne that day, and for the parts that I could see, I was about 4'6". There wasn't much going on out in the 3 quarters, so they have kind of had a philosophical shift in terms of how they play, but it's actually really entertaining to watch as well. So I mean, they're very comfortable in what they're trying to do, but there's a lesson in that for a lot of teams, in that they took the hit for about 2 to 3 seasons of playing badly but persisting, and then honing that, I suppose, that skill level to pass out of the tackle, which makes them so dangerous.
And they've kind of flipped it, like you say. You know, you're looking at, you know, and you were saying, oh, it's pack and scrummaging, and now you look at their team as a whole, and you feel that their unit as a backline is probably better than their unit as a forward pack, and that's come with, as you say, as their evolution over the last 4 or 5 years. But they are very comfortable and playing at such a high intensity week in, week out. I know they're not winning all those games, but even to win 2 games in the rugby championship, because it's so attritional and played at such a high pace, that, you know, they are going to be I think a tiny bit more cohesive in the first 10-15 minutes compared to where Ireland are. I would completely agree with Dunne. I do still think Ireland will win, but I do, just 18 points just seems a bit mind-boggling to me.
You were down at their training sessions during the week. You were saying you got pretty much unprecedented access, certainly more than you get with the Ireland squad.
Well, that's it. I didn't know if this was like the norm where teams, you know, like they had the access, and, you know, you get to 10 minutes where photographers and video guys are allowed to take what they want, and
essentially that's just the warm-up. You don't actually see any.
I was ready. We were ready to go, you know, because you know that, like, it's a sacred place, certainly in Ireland anyway. But then the media guy was like, oh yeah, you're welcome to stay. So we got to see like the full session. And I was saying to you off air, Nathan, like, that was only their second pitch session of the week, so we were watching them running their backline plays, you know, the usual warm-up stuff. But then it was really interesting afterwards. We got to see Ledesma put the pack through scrum drills. So yeah, it was really interesting to get that kind of insight. I think they're sort of fully aware of the criticisms of their scrum. We were talking to Guido Petty afterwards, and it's not often you see Joe Schmidt getting caught out, we'll say, with the team selection, and he was really puzzled to see him named in the back row. It's the first time in 43 caps, I think, that he's playing anywhere outside of the second row. So I think that's a clear sign that he'll add much more power to the background. They're probably looking to after Ireland's line out as well. But yeah, like he was making reference to the fact that, you know, they're well aware of the criticism that's coming. But I think you guys are right. Even when you look back to the 2015 World Cup, you look at the back three that did the damage that day, Tukale, Cordero, Imhoff, none of those guys are involved today. Yet you look at their back three, Buffelli, Delgi and Moyana, like, those guys are almost just as good, and they're 23, 21 and 28. Like, this is a new breed coming again. I think they're a little bit away from sort of hitting their straps, but I think come the World Cup, these guys are going to be seriously dangerous.
I think Moyana was very dangerous. That try he got against the All Blacks, it was like poetry in motion. He beat about 3 or 4 guys with one kind of swift movement of his hips, and a couple of All Blacks falling on their feet. He's a pretty dangerous attacker.
And so is Delgi. Like, I mean, we talk about Jordan Larmour. This is the Argentinian Jordan Larmour. This guy has potential to really cut Ireland open if they get loose, just kind of like they did in 2015, I guess. But it's just interesting that none of those same guys are involved, but they're still as dangerous.
So are Ireland going to crush them in the scrum today?
I was just going to ask him, what was Ledesma's scrummaging session like? Were they throwing pieces of raw meat in there?
My Spanish wasn't great, so I was actually watching him standing up at the scrum machine while he was shouting at the lads. But it was interesting because their team hadn't been named at this stage, and was kind of watching Petty packing down on the flank, and I was thinking, okay, this is a bit strange because obviously no one expected it. But I think Ireland will probably fancy themselves, won't they, up front? I mean, how could they not? This Ireland scrum has become a real weapon under Greg Feek, and having the 3 guys back in the front row, Healy, Furlong, Best, like, it looks like a serious weapon that they could definitely get after him, I think.
It's just a pack that's just full of power across the board. You know, with Sean O'Brien back, and you look at O'Brien and Manny's, you know, and CJ, you just think that, like, that's such a powerful back row, and you essentially can play left, and you can play left and right with Sean and Pete, and get them to go after ball in different areas, and it's just got a nice balance to it, and especially a really good ball carrying balance. You know, the CJ it takes the pressure off CJ from a ball carrying point of view, to have someone like Sean O'Brien there, and vice versa. You know, you're not looking when the ball goes to Sean O'Brien, he has to make grain line, because, you know, in the next phase CJ can come around the corner and get you some go forward. So it does have a really good balance, both defensively and offensively, I think, to be able to go after the ball a bit stronger, and then, you know, also attackingly to balance up your carries.
I think Woody was on during the week talking about the famous Bajada, the Argentinian tactic in terms of when they scrummage, binding very differently from the second rows to the front row. But he says they've more or less abandoned that now, because a mix between the changes in the scrum laws and the difficulty they used to have with the hooker hooking the ball back. They tended to pick 3 prop forwards in their front row as opposed to 2 props and a hooker. But the difficulty for a hooker to drop his hips and sweep the ball back, hook the ball back through his right leg usually, they had issues around that because of the way they were scrummaging. They would, I suppose, direct all their power from the 2 second rows inwards in an arrowhead towards the hooker, which would put huge pressure on the opposition hooker, but similarly was very difficult for their own hooker to hook the ball back. So it looks like they've actually abandoned what is their traditional strength and gone a bit more homogenised and like everybody else is doing. So I don't know whether that's a strength or a weakness for them.
Mike Ross is very interesting on that, talking about the 2015 World Cup, that they kind of knew it was coming, but they were powerless to stop it because, like Andy said, like all the pressure comes from the back row forced onto the hooker, so your hooker is taking the weight, and it just means that, like you said, it's an invisible arrow. That's what they call it, isn't it? That, like, I don't really know what goes on in the front row of a scrum, but it was just interesting to hear Mike Ross say, who's like a self-confessed scrum nerd himself, that the fact they knew it was coming, stopping it is just so different. So I think it's very interesting that they have moved away from that. Now, I couldn't tell from the training on Thursday what they were actually doing in terms of technique, but it'll be interesting to see today.
This was your big chance. You could have been straight on the phone to Joe afterwards and a few secrets for you.
It would have been great. I'd never be allowed into Argentina again.
There's something incredibly compelling about watching a scrum session. It's never failed. It's never failed to I suppose evoke my interest watching 8 guys going down one time after another. It's very, very macho environment. The forwards coach gets into a little squat position. There's a lot of chit chat. There's a lot of bravado and shouting going on.
Which is very, very limited.
Well, I'm just fascinated watching them one go after another.
Thrown into one, Andy?
Well, a very, very interesting thing was I did my coaching badges, the IRFU coaching badges, after I'd retired. And I got put into a scrum as a coach, and it was probably one of the most instructive things that's ever happened to me, because as a mouthy little number 10, if that had been done to me 5 years previously, I might have realised what the guys are going through in front of me. But I mean, it felt like my skull was getting crushed. I couldn't hear anything. I started to kind of tap the floor and get me out panic. I thought my back was going to kink a bit, and it was quite a scary experience. I had guys coming from all directions. I felt like I was getting crushed. I was
in that scrum with you. Some big guys.
Well, there was a lot of. I think a guy called Des Dillon was in it with me, about 6'7", pushing from behind me as a number 8. Some pretty stocky front rowers, but they were all doing their coaching badges at the same time. But it's just not a nice place to be. Yeah.
I actually scrummed down in a European Cup game in Bourgoin.
In an actual game?
In an actual game. Lewis Moody got sin-binned, and we were in, and Castro was the tight head, and Leo Cullen was the second row. When we packed down, there was a hit, and I had my head, and there's this gap between my head and Castro's ass, and I'm going, that's definitely not supposed to be there. I was actually scrumming down on Leo's ass rather than the prop's ass.
You were going for a new technique anyway.
And
Johne Murphy's Bahada.
Technically 2 number 8s, so it was like 3, and 2 at the back. We actually managed to get a scrum, and Castro just turned around and goes, "You're never ever getting in a scrum again." I went, "Yeah, that's fair enough." No problem.
If you talk to the likes of Mike Ross, or ex props I'd keep in touch with, like Emmett Byrne or Peter Coyle, it's always very interesting to watch a game with those guys, because they have a very different view than everybody else, and they have a different insight. And I would look at it and think, right, okay, Conor Murray's getting the ball away, or Luke McGrath's getting the ball away, what backline play is coming up? They're still kind of pondering what's going on right at the front line, and they're giving you little nuggets that you just can't actually see with just in plain view. They're telling you, okay, he's got his ribs twisted, he's got his neck bent, and
in every organisation there's a front row club, and when they go for coffee, all they talk about is scrums. They could spend 6-7 hours a week talking about scrums, where you'd go off and have a coffee, you might talk maybe 20 minutes rugby and then talk about anything. But when the front row are
what
together,
are they talking about? Is it just who's behind them and who to blame?
Angles and...
Did you go to a couple of years ago, the IRFU put on a Scrum session with Greg Feek for the media, and like it was so interesting because like again, like you're writing about this stuff, but if you don't play in there, you don't really know what's going on. So Greg Feek did like, you know, a demonstration of like what we're actually trying to do here, and it was really interesting stuff. Like again, I've never been in a front row before, so I don't know what's going on, but
I've often thought as the game, you know, the officiating in rugby could well do with getting a scrum specialist referee, because like, and I don't think myself and Johnny are being in any way facetious. Like we played the game for 10 years as professionals and have no idea what's going on in the scrum. I can guarantee a referee who never played the game at a professional level has no idea either. So for them, there's a hell of a lot of guessing going on, which is fundamental and sometimes can change the course of a whole game or season.
It must mean as well there is like the dark arts, but if you have a smart scrum coach who is fully aware of that the referee he's probably looking out for very specific pointers and where there's a little bit of illegality, that if you have a way of getting around that, something that'll just get you through a couple of important moments.
Look at Peter O'Mahony in the last few weeks. I mean, with his bind, I mean, I know so much has been made of that, but like he's been getting away with that for the last few weeks, despite the fact that it's been highlighted so many places. Now, I think in his last game, in fairness, he did stop, but like it's crazy, like you said, when referees have never played the game. So how
something
are they?
So small as binds, like, you know, there's a South African guy that we used to play against, and I'm not going to name him because he's still playing, but he used to, when the referee would pack down on his side, he'd be perfect behind, everything square, and then the minute the ref would pop around to the other side, he'd flick and grab his opposition loose head's jersey just underneath, and from moving his hand from outside to underneath, he would turn a scrum inside out. And he, like, I was talking about and he goes, no, it's just simply the angle I can get my shoulder in when I do that I can just move. And like you're talking like there's 25 cameras looking at this, and he was never ever getting caught for it. But like that, everyone knew he was doing it. And the referee was flagged. But he'd always get away from it because he just pick and choose when and when not to do it.
Does having Henderson in the second row instead of Toner make Ireland scrum a far bigger beast?
Possibly. I think Devin Toner is probably one of the most underrated players in Irish rugby, to be honest with you. I think he's incredibly consistent. I think that's why he's getting the bench spot today ahead of Tyg Byrne, who arguably him and James Ryan were the form locks in the country right now. I think he will have a bit of power, yes, but I wouldn't necessarily say that if Dev Toner was starting, it would have weakened the scrum by any means.
No. It's an interesting one when you look at the wealth we have in that position. That Tyg Byrne is probably figured as the fourth out of four today, but the three guys that are in the squad that are the best rugby players are not Dev. Dev isn't the best rugby player out of those four, but it doesn't mean he's not the best lock. I mean, is Joey Carberry and Johnny Sexton, who's the best rugby player, but who's the best out half? You know, Johnny is the best strategist, and Johnny is the best tactician, and understands the game and is so battle hardened. You could argue that as Joey got more innate talent, you know, he possibly does in terms of his running game, but Johnny is probably without doubt, you know, the better out half for the strategy and the benefit of the team. And I think that's where Devin's strengths lie in terms of how he reads the line out, how he calls that line out. And
you were making the point last week, I think that can't be underestimated, that we're at a stage now where most teams are pretty much hitting 100% of winning their own lineouts.
Yeah, it's very rare he makes a mistake even in the loose. Like he's just so consistent. His level of performance is always kind of, you know, 7 to 7.5. Sometimes he gets above that, you know, but he's you know when Dev plays that he's going to give you a minimum of a 7.5 performance all the time. He's just so consistent, and very rarely he makes mistakes, which obviously, you know, that just have someone so you know, not solid is the wrong word, but someone that's just, you know, so consistent in how he plays is a massive help to the whole squad.
As the CEO of the Irish Sports Statistics Company, they've had a kind of huge growth. They're a tech company.
Stat Sports?
I think it's Stat Sports. And the CEO had spoken recently about how Devin Toner is a statistical freak in terms of his injury profile and the mileage on his clock. He's literally never got injured. He's never missed a training session. Like, it's freakish, you know.
You talk about calling lineouts and the stuff that goes on in the front row. I think calling a lineout is, again, something that I don't know about, but from speaking to players, it's something that's so underestimated, how difficult it is to make the right call under pressure. Toner does that excellently, but it's been interesting. Joe Schmidt has put a big focus on other guys starting to do that now. Last week we're over in Chicago, and I think most people thought Tyg Byrne was called in lineup, but it was Quinn Roux, which was a surprise again. He's not used to doing that, but he started this season with Connacht. Tyg Byrne has started doing it with Munster as well, and this is all coming from Joe, because he probably knows that Devon only has a couple of years left to him, and he wants these guys, because with this time last year Henderson was probably not even calling the line out. It's only sort of in the last 12 months that he's taken that on as well, and it's another probably aspect of the game
and is all of that, so you want players like Quinn Roux to step up to another level, is all of this rooted in the defeat to Argentina last time, that you could well end up in a situation where actually Ian Henderson and Devon Toner are injured for a World Cup quarter-final, that suddenly Quinn Roux may be needed, and rather than what happened 3 years ago where you had a load of players thrown together and nobody quite knew who was in charge, that's never going to happen again.
Oh yeah, like I say, Joe Schmidt still has sleepless nights about that game. It's the one game that really haunts him. Again, this will be a good barometer to see how far they've come, but like you said, the changes that they can make from last week to this week, and you wouldn't expect the standards to drop. We mentioned the pack that's coming in. I think most people would probably agree that this is the first choice pack. Like, everyone is pretty much fit. Tyg Byrne might get a shout, but I think James Ryan and Henderson have earned their shot. Pretty much everyone.
This is pretty much the first choice team, isn't it? If you look at the team that started in Paris,
I think Rob Kearney,
aside from injuries, aside from Murray and Kearney being out injured,
I would say Murray and Kearney are probably the two inclusions, and even it's just Rob's big game experience going forward into what's ahead over the next 18 months. He always, regardless of his form week in, week out, when he's thrown in a big game by Joe, he always delivers. And he's always done that throughout his career. He is a big game player, and he'll produce every time on the big stage. And I think that's, Joe knows that about him, so he just feels so comfortable regardless of, everyone was calling last year his form wasn't great, and Jordan's form was ridiculous. They want, he's going to start ahead, but Cairns just has a level of performance in the big games that he just produces all the time.
Kieran Marmion, obviously a huge afternoon for him ahead, and it's probably similar to the Carberry-Sexton comparison. Does Joey Carberry need to be his own man, or does he need to do exactly what Johnny Sexton does when he's stepping in for Kieran Marmion? Does he have a very similar skill set to Conor Murray, or does he just have to go and do the basics and just let Johnny Sexton run that show?
I think he's got a slightly different skill set to Conor Murray. I think whereas Conor's passing is obviously right up there in terms of top 2 or 3 scrum halves in the world in terms of speed of pass and accuracy of pass, and it's something that, when you watch a great place kicker, there's an air of expectation that you go and put the kettle on when you watch a good place kicker. You're not actually going to sit around and watch the place kick. It's going over. When Conor Murray passes, it's going to land in a little square zone right on the sponsor's jersey, a sponsor sign on the jersey. When you see it differently in an international game, you start to realise that Conor Murray's passing is excellent, and that type of consistency will put Marmion under pressure, in that people will notice today the odd pass that if it's a bit askew, but where he may kind of be slightly behind Conor in terms of his passing game, he's not behind him in terms of his fitness levels, his work rate. His box kicking is very, very strong too. Again, probably slightly behind Conor on that, but so are all the Irish scrum halves, slightly behind Conor on that. He seems to me like he's a very strong character within the group, and that would probably be very much proven in the fact that he went on and played in the wing in a couple of internationals for Joe, and I think Joe massively appreciates what he did in those moments.
He loves that. I mean, like, there's a reason he's playing ahead of guys who have been excellent for their provinces, like McGrath and John Cooney. Joe puts so much stock in what Kieran Marmion and other players as well have done in a green jersey. I think he had a difficult enough season last year with Connacht, but then again they all did. But what he's done for Joe Schmidt, that counts for so much. I think that's what we're seeing. It, like you mentioned, he's an excellent defender as well, but like, if he goes out to try and be Conor Murray, it'll be a disaster. But I think he's experienced enough at this stage and probably comfortable in his own skin to know that there's just no point in doing that. He'll also be helped massively by playing next to Bundy Aki. I think that's a big, even in terms of communication, he'll have Johnny and Bundy, two guys who he's, in fairness, he's played with Sexton quite a bit at this stage as well. But I think that is the one position where there's probably is a bit of pressure coming on, and he didn't go to Chicago last week, went and played a bit for Connacht, so I think he'll know himself that there's pressure coming on. But at the moment, I think he's the undisputed second choice to Murray.
You were writing about Jordan Larmour in the paper today. Your assessment on the last few weeks, what were the main takeaways?
Yeah, well, there was a few, wasn't there? I mean, I don't really buy into this whole thing that, it was a second string Italian team. I totally agree that it was, but some of the things that he did in that game were just incredible. Like, if you just look at his footwork alone, if he gets that space, most defenders are going to struggle to defend against him. Yeah, I just think his development has been... It's been so rapid. People talk about the footwork and the movement and his pace, but I think he's starting to understand, to read the game a bit more. Talking to him after the game in Chicago, I thought it was really interesting. I was making the point in the piece today that he was pointing to flaws in his game. He pointed to, the Toulouse game. He got caught out for the try, and then, like, ironically enough, he gets stepped by an unbelievable footwork by Gittan. So he's fully aware that he's not the full product yet. I think Joe Schmidt probably would have sat down before the start of the month and picked his teams barring injuries, and I'm not sure Larmour might have played today, haven't played last week. I think Andrew Conway might have been thereabouts, but I think having played so well last week that his stock is just rising. He's a very different player to Rob Kearney. This will be a different kind of test because I already mentioned the back three of Buffelli, Delgay and Moyana, but there's no reason to suggest why he can't step up. I think I was looking back on it, just sort of different aspects outside of the breaks and the tries. You look back, that take he took over Falau in the third test, that kind of gets forgotten about. That was at a crucial game, a crucial stage in the decisive third test, and he takes a high ball over probably the best aerial player in the world without any hesitation. It was absolutely incredible, and like I said, a crucial moment. It gains momentum back for Ireland, and it's those kind of little things I think that Joe likes as well. It's not all the flash.
Yeah, it's the backfield cover. It is controlling the air, and both offensively and in defence as well. So that's massive because he's one of the players that you say to players when they're going, okay, just do your basics, and those moments you'll get a moment to show exactly how good you are, and then just take it, where he's going to do that. So it's actually the other stuff where you're like, your special moments, you're going to have maybe 10 of them anyway, but it's your backfield cover, it's your closing the gate in defence, and it's your high ball receipt. That they're the three things now today that you need to stand out. If he has that, then he is going to really, really push, for that 15th spot.
He seems to kind of represent this shift for me in Irish rugby, in that there's this new wave of young guys coming in where the challenge for Joe arguably is to rein in their creativity. That's never been the case in Irish rugby, and should he be reining in their creativity? I think the way Joe coaches is so I suppose rooted in detail and minutiae, and the attention to detail is vitally important for the success of his group overall. But I do think he genuinely appreciates this new wave of talent. If you look at McGrath, Marmion, John Cooney, the football in these guys, they're serious ballers. There's Carberry behind Sexton. There's Ringrose not starting today. There's Larmour then, biting on Carney's heels. Serious talent, really, really good footballers, really creative, explosive, expressive players. It's brilliant to have that in Irish rugby. We didn't have that. We had company men for 20 years who'd go in and do a good job, but it's very hard to drag a guy who'll do the job excellently, but just do the job. It's very hard to drag creativity out of that guy. It's a much easier task for Joe, is to rein in a little bit of creativity and ask a guy to, okay, let's work through the system I've got, but you're empowered to be expressive and creative, or you've got it in your toolbox to go and do it.
I think that's a really interesting point about this new wave of young guys, because there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance, and they're definitely on the right side of it. Again, I go back to speaking to Jordan Larmour after Chicago. He started talking about wanting to win the World Cup. We're not afraid of the All Blacks. We're as good as them. You wouldn't have heard that kind of talk a few years ago. And again, that's not being arrogant. Now, I'd say Joe Schmidt probably had a quiet word to him because they don't want these kind of things said, but they don't have any fear, and they've nothing to fear. That's I think that's the big thing about it. The likes of James Ryan, Andrew Porter, they're coming through as a new breed, and I think your likes of Johnny Sexton, Rory Best are all feeding off that, and that's kind of why Ireland are working so well.
Where's that skill set coming from? Is that the standard of coaching rising at schools level? Is this just a freak period of Irish rugby that we're getting these guys together?
I think in schools rugby there's a want to try and play within a structure, but not be as structured as a professional organisation. So it's to give guys a kind of a basis to play to play within something. And you know, we would coach, and a lot of the coaches that I know that I'd coach against at schools level, you know, there is no problem with an execution mistake, because you feel that you can upskill your players, that they'll execute that in 2 or 3 weeks' time or 2 months' time. But the mistake is not seeing a 3v1 in your own 22 and not taking it. You know, that's a mistake that we would feel would be like, oh, that's something that, you know, they should be seeing and they should be trying to execute it. And I think.
And how do you teach them to make sure they do see that?
Well, it just comes down to the work that you put in off the pitch with them. You know, showing them different scenarios, playing certain games that create those scenarios that you're able to give them that they see it and then they go for it and execute it. And I think, go back to Dunner's point, when you have that, it's something that stuck with me. Aaron Major used to always say that, you know, coming from New Zealand, like, clarity creates freedom. So if you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing on second or third phase, that if you get a ball in a position but you see a gap behind you, you're so confident that you go, well, fine, I'm going to take that, because I have the freedom to play within a structure if I can back up why I took it. And I think all players in Ireland have that clarity. So in a sense, everyone says, oh, well, they're so structured. But yeah, but they have the freedom to be able to take an opportunity when they see it. And I think they really have that balance now, that they all know their roles. And that's the point we're trying to make about Jordan. Like, he has that clarity and he knows exactly what he's supposed to do, but he has the freedom to play.
It's a great line, actually, and it probably sums up exactly, I would say, the Joe Schmidt mantra, that you will have the freedom when you do everything else, the basics, 100%. That's where the freedom comes in.
Yeah, they're coming through a culture as well. I think, like, what the Irish 20s have done over the last couple of years. I mean, the likes of Porter, Ryan, Jacob Scottsdale, they beat the All Blacks for the first time. They got to an under-20s World Cup final. But Johnny hit the nail on the head. Nigel Carlin probably started it, and even Mike Ruddock before him, and now Noel McNamara has continued that on. The players have the freedom to play what they see. If they make a mistake, they're hauled in and it's highlighted. But it's not, like, you know, it's not a big deal, like, no matter how big the mistake is, because at that level, you're right, Johnny, you have to be free to make the mistakes.
There's an emphasis on execution mistakes and effort mistakes. Effort mistakes are annoying and something that are essentially punished, because it's someone who doesn't get up off the ground quicker and doesn't fill a spot in the fence, or is lazy on a second phase and doesn't hit a short ball, or misses a trail runner on the inside. Those effort mistakes, they're frustrating and annoying, and they're essentially would be droppable offences if you have enough of them. Right. But execution mistakes, no problem, because to a point. But, you know, it's okay, I understand. And the question is, okay, why did you make that decision? Well, because I saw a player in front and then I saw one behind, so it's actually a 3v1+1, so I want to run it. Good, we're away. Now I have to make sure as a coach that I have to upskill my players that they can execute that then next time. And that's the onus. The onus is on you as a coach, that execution mistakes are actually your fault. They're not the players. But effort mistakes are the players' fault.
Well, Cian mentioned the Nigel Carlin, Mike Ruddock coaching at under-20s level and the huge success we've had. But underneath that, the school system is, I suppose when you watch schools rugby, it has been criticised in terms of its actual structure, because everyone works towards a cup competition, a knockout competition. And you would have thought, given it is so intense at schools level and there's such preparation and hard work put into it, that when you go to this all or nothing cup game, that you're going to clam up. But they don't. They play a really... they embrace risk at schools rugby level, and you watch these kids throwing the ball around with it, you know, inside their own 22 and attacking from deep. And really what they're doing is honing skills under pressure. So your acquisition of skill is happening at a coaching level, and they're being allowed to go out and make those mistakes, and that whole interesting area Johnny is talking about as a coach, what you allow and what's an effort mistake and what's accuracy. But in that school system, they're honing skills under quite intense pressure in an all or nothing situation, in a cup situation. It's not a league. So I think when they get the best of the best at that level, then get put through to the Irish under-20s, and they've got a guy who's so so incredibly focused on skills and so good at coaching it, like Nigel Carolyn is. The tail end of my professional career, Nigel was the assistant backs coach in Connacht, and in a 10-year career I thought he was the best skills coach I'd come across. He's outstanding. So
what is it that he has?
Well, he's got an ability to improve your skills from one week to the next. Very few coaches have that. Most coaches will deal with a group of people and work on the shape of the team and how you operate from September through to April. But you might not be any better as a player at the end of the year in terms of your individual skill level. But like Nigel had pulled me aside as a 30-year-old who'd 11 years professional at that stage and was asking me why couldn't I kick off my left foot better, which was an entirely fair question. And he was saying, like, I'm prepared to work on it with you. You know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, let's go out and do it. So if that's the guy who's coaching Irish under-20s rugby and they're coming from this really, really strong school system, that's why it's no accident that we've got this wave of guys coming in behind the top-seeded people in Irish rugby. But right behind them, there's this wave of people who are not afraid of the All Blacks, who are not afraid of going to a World Cup quarters, semis and final, because they've done it at their own level, and their expectation levels in an Irish jersey are we should be winners, and that's a shift from our history.
Yeah. How much importance are you putting in the All Blacks game next week? Like, say Rob Kearney and Conor Murray are fit. Are you putting them straight in, or do you actually want Kieran Marmion and Jordan Larmour to play in a game of that importance? For someone like Jordan Larmour next week, maybe you don't get any opportunity for a bit of freedom. Maybe you just have to do the basics for the entire game. You want to test him to make sure that he can concentrate for 70, 80 minutes and just do that. If there is no space, if there is no chance to shine, do you want that, or do you actually just go and think, well, Rob Kearney is my man for the big occasion, I'm throwing him straight back in there?
I'd say probably Joe would probably pick Rob if he's fit next week. I would have thought, depending on how Jordan goes today, obviously, but I would say he'll probably go back to, you know, his tried and tested, because historically his team selections have been that way. I think next week is a massive game in terms of a barometer where they are going into next year, but it's not the be all and end all. But I think it's any test match against the All Blacks that, you know, everyone involved was going to want to. And I think you look back at how the two after Chicago 2 weeks later, you know, there's not a bad blood, but that game was played on an edge, you know, and expect that to be brought up and expect it to be played on right on the line from both sides next week. I think possibly it can be argued that, you know, New Zealand at times stepped across that line, but I think, you know, Ireland are probably prepared next week to probably follow them over it if needs be.
And that's a compliment to Ireland as to how far they've come and how respected they are by New Zealand.
Absolutely. Greg Feek was talking about this during the week, about how he now has people coming up to him, asking him from home, asking him, oh, how's Tadhg Furlong getting on? Whereas, like a couple of years ago, I honestly remember interviewing a couple of All Blacks players in Dublin 2 years ago, and they couldn't name, like, you know, they can't name Irish players. Sean O'Brien is probably the only one. But I think we talk about a shift in Irish rugby. There's been a shift there now.
You say that, Richie McCaw's coming up later, and I was asking him about the Irish back row, and obviously Sean O'Brien gets the first mention. Then Peter O'Mahony goes, I'm not sure about the other guy.
But that sums it up.
CJ Sander.
Yeah, that sums it up. That's what they think. But there's been a slight shift, like in that as well. I think next week's game is really important for exactly the points Johnny made. But it's also going to be the last time Ireland are going to play against a Southern Hemisphere team before a potential World Cup quarter final. Which I don't know how much stock you put in that, but we were asking Johnny Sexton about it a few weeks ago, and that kind of matters too, because they're obviously going to have the Six Nations. They have the game against the USA, and then they'll roll into the familiar teams who they're playing in the World Cup warm-up. So this is the last time they'll get a chance to play a team like this, which I think is an important aspect too.
A lot of texts coming in on 53106. Lads, Argentina have 3 proper jumpers in each line-out. Do they see something to attack with Devon Toner not playing? They've the second most defenders beaten in the championship. They'll go for it all day long. Ireland can start slow or have the 13-minute relaxation they had last week. They need to go and send a message early.
I think they probably see something in Rory Best's throwing as well. I mean, it can struggle. It can struggle under pressure. I think you talk about guys putting pressure on other people. I thought Niall Scannell was very unlucky to be hauled off at half time last week in Chicago, and then Sean Cronin made a huge impact off the bench. Now, I don't think Joe really looks at Sean Cronin as a potential starter because of what he gives you off the bench, but I think, like we mentioned, Petty starting earlier, that line out, they're going to target it, I think, more because best throwing can be iffy under pressure, can't it?
Well, last week, all the victorious teams, on the whole glut of international rugby that was on last week and again today, the winning sides all had an average, their percentage success rate in line-out was 95% plus, and the notable difference in that was South Africa, who had 14 out of 18 in their line-out. Yeah. So it's become so crucial in terms of your overall success, because it means you can hold on to possession for an extended period, because it means it makes your general work less attritional because you're holding on to ball. It's become a hugely important factor, and I think the fact that the Argentinian, that text in, the Argentinians have 3 jumping options. I suppose we do too in O'Mahony as well, in the back row. We've got to match that, if not better it, today in order to, I would say, confirm that bookies' feeling of 13 to 18 points. We won't do it without a successful line-out, and with Devon not in there, it's certainly an area that I think the Argies will be focusing on.
Saturday panel brought to you this afternoon with Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products. We're almost done. I'll just run through a couple of these texts that are coming in. What goes on in the scrum stays in the scrum. Front row rules. Jordan Larmour footwork last seen by Jason Robinson, but has so much more potential. Well, if he has the career that Jason Robinson had, I think Jordan Larmour will be pretty satisfied.
Probably has more footballing ability than Jason Robinson does in terms of his kicking game and stuff. He probably has more of a natural kicking game than Jason Robinson would have had. But Jason Robinson's probably once in a lifetime. But I
think there is an obvious parallel in terms of their footwork. That the speed of the footwork and the tiny steps and the explosiveness and change of direction
out of it.
That was one of the points I was making today as well. Like Larmour's kicking game, because he doesn't use it that much, because he just backs himself. He had a couple of kicks last week against Italy that were huge. He's got a big boot in him, but it's because he wants to run the ball all the time, which is great. We haven't seen it yet, but that's part of his arsenal as well.
Yeah. Lads, what you're talking about there is jazz. You learn the rules and processes music in order to improvise, not to play the same thing again and again.
Right.
That's exactly what you were talking about, Johnny. That's what you need to bring into your next coaching session. This is jazz, boys. This is jazz.
Well, I had a very...
listen to even less.
I had a moment as a coach, as a young coach about 5-6 years ago, where I tried to explain to the playing group that rugby was like traditional music, and that sometimes you watch a guy start and everyone else joins in.
For too long.
And I never forget the blank faces around the changing room. So, you are talking about rugby players and jocks here. So if we get too smart about it,
Johnny, I'd say your Nace lads would love that, would they?
Oh my God!
For next week, Johnny.
Yeah, no, I'd be straight out.
For what it's worth, I agree. It's like jazz.
I like that comment. You're definitely going to be using that. You went with the wrong example.
I used trad music instead of jazz.
Andrew Doyle is watching us on YouTube. How will the result of England-New Zealand, if England win, affect team selection for Ireland?
Well, England
next
won't
week.
win.
So that game gets underway in about half an hour. There's a lot to look forward to in that.
I'd be amazed if England won that game.
Is there still a sense, I don't know, that Eddie Jones, it's a bit like Mourinho at United, while they got the result, you still feel they're possibly just 80 minutes from complete another crisis again?
I think he's still trying to figure out a couple of things, isn't he?
Yeah,
in the centre.
I listened to a few podcasts and the lads, they just said that, like, he's exactly like Jose Mourinho. He's just like, it's all about the media and they're all out to get me regardless of what's going on. And even last week, like, you'd be delighted if I got sacked so that you can come in and get the next fella sacked, and you're just going, well, hold on a second, like, and they were lucky last week in terms of that it was a penalty. I think anyone knows it was a penalty. That's all it was last week, and it's different. But I just think his mindset and his craziness towards the media. They can't but filter through to the players, and that seeps then out, and they then have an atmosphere, and they talk, and how they talk. Like I know Ben Young's person, and how he spoke and what he did during last summer, walking away from that interview was like, that's not Benny. Like and I think that definitely come from Eddie Jones, and it's not. I just don't think it's not a good spot for English rugby players to be in, or England rugby to be in. And look, it's great for the rest of us, and it showed during the Six Nations. But he just, I don't know, he's waiting for it to happen, and it's kind of like if it does happen, he's like, well, I told you so.
Because there was a lot of ill discipline from England during the Six Nations. Was it in the game against Ireland right at the start of the game with Owen Farrell? Like, is Eddie Jones the best man to get the most out of Owen Farrell?
No, well, I don't know. I think he's effectively a small angry man, you know, and he's got a siege mentality, and quite remarkably at one stage had one loss in 23 games, but seemed to be a teaspoonful away from a crisis, because he doesn't give his group a level of, he doesn't seem to promote leadership in a responsible way. I mean, their leadership probably reflects his personality, and it's spiky and ill-advised at times. And you know, where's the cool, calm leader in that group who's, you know, grabbing the group together in moments of crisis and giving them a direction? I don't see it. And bringing a guy like Will Carling back to be a leadership coach for their leader group, because as Eddie Jones said, I'm not English and I can't instill a pride of being English in these people. It's so bizarre to bring a guy from 30 years back to give them leadership. I don't think they can get leadership from people based on what his personality is.
You guys would know a lot more, obviously, than I would, but it must be so difficult to play under a coach who doesn't seem like he knows what he's doing, and then you're expected to go out and execute a plan. And you know, the longer it goes on, you're starting to wonder what's actually going on behind the scenes. And even yesterday, having the pot shot at Johnny Sexton was just so bizarre.
Random. I saw that on Twitter.
It was bizarre.
So this was basically, he said that Johnny Sexton would have got away with Owen Farrell.
He gets protection, by the referees. Sort of like what Ross Moriarty was saying a few weeks ago after Leinster played Dragons. But I don't know what relevance that had to anything. If Ireland were playing England next week, you could kind of understand the psychology, but just having a random pot shot was just bizarre.
Yeah. Lads, we got to leave it there. Thanks a lot for coming in the studio.
Cheers, Nathan.
That is our Saturday panel. We're talking football next.
Join that conversation. Text us on 53106. Texts cost 30 cents. At Expert Electrical, get €100 off and a free 5-year warranty on Whirlpool Supreme Care washing machine.